We welcome everyone. Parshas Vayechi. Vayechi, to live. Vayechi Yacov. Yacov lived. He lived in Mitzrayim, it says 17 years. And these are the days of Yaakov, adds up the numbers. V'yimei Yaakov Shnei Chayad, these are the days of his life. And it says, Sheva Shanim V'Arba'im Ma'ashana, 147 years. This verse needs a lot of explanation. It says Yaakov lived, and this is the parsha when Yaakov dies. So he lived. Okay, what does this mean? He lived. And it says the whole calculation, it says he lived 17 years in Egypt. The total number is 147. Well, that we knew in last week's parsha, when he met Paro, he says 130. So 130 and 17 is 147. We know that. And it's even stranger because by Yaakov, we don't know what happened to his life in particular. It says that we calculated he was 14 years staying in the Beis Midrash, in the learning place of Shem and Aver. We calculate that from the years of Yishmael, and now all of a sudden the verse is very elaborate on the years of Yaakov. 17 years he lived in Egypt, and the total number is 147. Now, what does it mean he lived? So the Zohar says an incredible thing. And it says like this, that Vayechi Yaakov, Yaakov lived. This was his main life. This was the place where he really lived. This was the experience of life for Yaakov. Not only that, it was the experience of life that went and enlivened all of his previous years. Now, that raises a number of questions. First of all, if this was the main life of Yaakov, how does it happen in Egypt? Right? He's living in Israel, the Holy Land. Why should it happen there? Happens when he goes to Egypt? Strange. Also, Sadik points out that if this is talking about the greatness of Yaakov, that he lived, and this is, so we know there's two names for Yaakov. There's Yaakov and there's Yisrael. Yisrael is the name of Yaakov in the higher level. Yisrael, if you flip the letters around, it spells Li Rosh. To me is the head, he's the head. And Yaakov is the heel. So Yaakov is the whole entity, but Yisrael is the name that reflects the higher level of Yaakov. So it should have said that living was Yisrael, which it says later on in the verse calls him Yisrael, but now it calls him Yaakov when it talks about his living. And why is it calculated? Why is it so important to all the years that it ties together? Let me explain. There's an amazing thing about this. We have to understand about Yaakov's living, the 17 years, the greatest years of his life was in Mitzrayim. If the Gemara says that three people, Hashem gave them a taste of the world to come in this world. Who was that? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Now, how do we know that? Because there's a verse that says by each one of them, the word all, kol, everything. Yaakov, it says bakol. Hashem blessed him Bako. Yitzchak says Mikol, from all. And when Yaakov met Esav, he said to him, take my gift, because I have kol, I have everything. And from there we learn out that Yaakov is already complete. Now, that really begs the question, because if Yaakov's completion happened way back when he had the interaction with Esav, that was years ago, with a lot of suffering till this point till he goes to Egypt. It doesn't make sense. If he completed what he had to complete, like Avram and Yitzchak, he should have been already in the place of the world to come, in this world that God gave him, but he didn't give it to him to go to Egypt. Let me explain this a little bit deeper. By Abraham apparently finished his tests on the Akeres Yitzchak, but he brought Yitzchak as an offering. Okay, that seems to be he's completed, and that makes a lot of sense. So, and once he gave a shir one time, he said that's even why Sarah died, because it was the completion. Wasn't that, the way we understand a lot of times, because this and because of that, and she got scared. But the deeper explanation we once talked about was that really she actually completed it. And now her soul returned. Avram also completed his mission, and that's why it's an amazing discussion. Avram afterwards he remarries this woman. He marries Keturah. Some say it's Hagar. He remarries her, and he has these kids. Yishbok and Zimron and Midjan and Midon and all these 6 kids. I don't even know what they're about. Beis Yaakov says that what happened was, what he was doing there was he was giving birth to these children that could have come out from Yitzchak, but Yitzchak was judgment, and it would have been too harsh if these kids came out through Yitzchak. So Abraham was giving birth to them. Which was strange. When you read it, you're like, I understand. What does it mean? He was doing Yitzchak's job? And in a certain way, yes. Because once Avram finished his mission, he was done. He could have left. He was doing other things now. He was fixing up Yitzchak's job. God made it come out through him that he finished the mission and help Yitzchak. But really, he, as the human being, Avraham, as it says, when the angel called out to him, it says, Avraham, Avraham. When he called to say, stop, don't shech Yitzchak, it's called Avram, Avram. The Medrash says, why say it twice? Because he says, now the Avraham below in this world matches the vision of Avram in the upper worlds. He was complete. He was kol, he had everything. Makol was done. Yitzchak, at the Akedah Yitzchak, he was already complete. And that's really why the rest of his life he's blind. Blind is one of the four that are considered like dead. And it says the Yetzer Hara was gone from him. He was in a different place. He was always in a different reality than everybody else. He couldn't leave Israel because he didn't have work to do there. He was an olatam. He was an offering that was brought. It says his ashes are still there. It's the merit we have every Rosh Hashanah. And Yitzchak was offered. He actually died. He died, and we know he came back to life. He wrote the bracha of Mechayim Esim, bring back to life. So he was a person that had tasted death, and he was living in a certain sense in the world to come. A taste of it, at least. Yaakov, when should that happen to him? That should happen to him in the fight he had against the Sar, the angel of Esav. It says he won there, and that's what's called Yisrael. And that's really why, after he says, right after that meeting to Esav, I have kol, I have everything. Because really, in reality, that's when he finished everything. And that explains why afterwards it says Yacov, if Vayechi Yacov, he wanted to sit in peace. Why do you want to sit in peace? And the Medrash says that, Hashem says, not enough that tzaddikim, they have all this world to come, they have to have in peace right now. It's a very strange understanding the Medrash, because we know we have a principle, as a Gemara in Harius, it says that sometimes Hashem will give it tzaddik this world and the next world. He can have two tables. Sometimes he won't. Sometimes he'll have just the next world. All the calculations that Hashem has of everyone's mission in life. But if Yaakov did finish his mission at that moment, and he would now want to sit and learn Torah, we saw Hashem gave him a taste of the world to come. But years and years later, after 22 years of suffering with Yosef, then he gets 17 of the taste of the world to come in Egypt. Why? Why didn't he finish it like Avram Yitzchak did? Now, one other thing I want to talk about with this whole life of Yaakov is he's going down to Egypt to see his son. And he says that, he can now die because he sees Yosef. The whole thing was seeing Yosef. And I have to explain that a little bit because people don't fully understand it. Obviously, it's a tremendous sense of love for his son, his beloved son, that's obvious, as every human being has that natural inclination. Yaakov is another component to this, which is that Yaakov had a tradition. If all of his sons make it, they become the Jewish people, he will not see Gehenna. He will not see the punishments of afterlife, of Gehenna. He won't see it. He would have succeeded. That was it. And when Yosef is gone, it's not only is it a reminder of his loss of Rachel, which was his central soulmate, the extension of Rachel, his central continuation, which is Yosef, is also lost. But he's lost. He's lost. And what is the proof of it? His connection to Hashem is changed. Now, unfortunately, we don't understand what is to have Ruach HaKodesh, to have divine inspiration, but that is drinking life. That's what King David says when he says, Al tazveni, don't leave me alone. Ruach kodshech, don't take your ruach kodesh from me. It's a place where the tzaddikim lived in a connection to the world. So we're lost in wherever we're lost in. But Yaakov, who had this clear connection to Hashem and ruach kodesh, divine inspiration, and now it was gone. It was lost. He sees Yosef. And this is the culmination of of all the suffering that he's gone the last 22 years. And the pasuk says that Yosef went to greet Yaakov. Vayar elav, and he appeared to him. Yosef appeared to Yaakov. Now's the meeting. Vayipol tzavarav, he falls on his neck and he's crying. Vayeth, he cries. Al tzavar od, he continues to cry on his neck. So Gemara says, wait a minute. Yosef is crying on Yaakov's neck. What's Yaakov doing? Doesn't say he was crying. It says it was a time for Krishma. He was saying Krishma. Now that seems to be a little bit strange. It seems that Yaakov has maybe some issues with time management. I mean, you know you're going to see your son that you haven't seen 22 years. This is the moment. Maybe you could have met him 5 minutes later and said Krishma first. No, it was the moment of Krishma. He was saying Krishma. Yosef is crying on Yaakov, and Yaakov is saying Krishma. We have to explain this. I mean, it's somewhat self-evident, but we have to explain what this means. I want to explain it in light of this whole thing of Yaakov's life coming to fruition in Egypt and why he didn't have this taste of the world to come years earlier before the suffering of Yosef, like his forefathers. Let's understand. There are two aspects that we always have to deal with in life. And this, I repeat this a lot because I think it's one of the hardest things for us to comprehend, to understand. And most people are tilted one way or another, and it's very hard to strike the balance. Hashem put us into this world, and he gave us the Torah. And that means that we can and must do. Because if we couldn't, there'd be no point in putting us here. You can't say it's too hard, because if it was too hard, then why would you be put in this situation? You're obviously put in this situation because you are given the Torah to fix the world up. So the aspect of the human being, the central component is he's made B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of Elokim. And as the Nefesh HaChaim says, the name Elokim means the master of all powers, that God gave human beings the power to fix up the world and themselves. And that is, the Torah is given to you and you can do it. It's you. Now, there's another system which happens at the same time, and you don't know how to balance it. But although you can do it, I could do it, at the same time, there is a Ratzon Hashem, there's a plan that Hashem has that we don't fully understand. He gave us the parameters, but we don't know how everything is going to fit together. Only after we leave this world will we have a taste to understand the things that are unfathomable. So there's a certain place where a person has to also give, let go. This is not what Hashem wants. You were pushing it, you were doing it. Like there's a statement that says, a person that should daven for the geula, but there were points where it said the person can't push too much, can't push it because they have the time. So we want the geula, we want Hashem to bring the redemption. And there are stories in the Gemara when Rabbi Chia, one of the great rabbis, started to daven. He started saying he was God to daven in front of everyone and said, Hashem makes Mashiach Ruach Geshem, he blows the wind and brings the rain. The rain started coming, saying and bring the dead back to life. So there are things that maybe people could do and great people could do, but is that what Hashem wants? Sometimes you try, but it doesn't go. And as a human being who's built in the way that we naturally are supposed to want to do, it is a very difficult, torturous experience to say, it's not up to me, it's beyond me. And that is the ability to accept what Hashem wants from us. So it's a balance. You got to try your hardest. And at the same time, there are other things that are outside of our power. That even a person who's religious and righteous, says, okay, I'm gonna become the greatest learner in the world. Okay, you try. But if that's not what Hashem wants, then at a certain point you have to say, okay, so what am I supposed to do? I always repeat this Gemara, my favorite Gemara, it says that a person who pushes the hour runs away from him. A person who waits for the hour waits for them. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you don't try. You try. But if you keep trying and it's not going, then you have to say to yourself, wait a minute. So am I pushing it because it's the right thing to do? Am I pushing it because I want this thing and maybe it's not the right thing to do? You need to reassess and then say, maybe this is not the Ratzon Hashem. Every case is individual, but it's the concept. And it's very, very hard because it's literally a paradox. It is the opposite trait. Now, the simple first level is we have to do the work, and there's nobody that embodies that more than Yacov. Yacov is the one. Abraham, he was a Nasi, Elohim. He was the king. Wherever they went, they wanted to make him the king. He was like, Abraham. Even Yitzchak, who, whatever, they kicked him out of Gror, but he became wealthy and they stayed away from him. Yaakov, every single thing in his life is he's got to earn it, he's got to get it, because Yaakov begins that process called the process of Torah. It's the process where Hashem is not just giving it to you as a kindness. Avram, the forefathers weren't commanded the Torah. They did it out of the Fnim Shosadin. They did it beyond, and Hashem gave them from beyond. They weren't obligated, but Yaakov starts the process of Torah. Torah means once Hashem's going to give us the Torah, it's going to be obligatory. And when we do, we get this result. And when we don't do, we get that result. So Yaakov is the epitome of earning it. That's why he says when he has the vision of the sulam, the ladder, he says the name Elohim. If you, God will be with me. Meaning Elohim, he asked for judgment. The name Elohim means judgment. He did not want any freebies. He didn't want Hashem to give him chesed. He wanted to earn it all himself. And that is the greatness of Yaakov. He earns it all himself. Now, Avram, it's like Yacov, it says they each fixed up an aspect of Adam Rishon. It says that Avram was compared to the nefesh of the different levels of the soul. Avram was the nefesh of Avram, of Adam Rishon, and then Yitzhak was like the ruach, and Yaakov was like the neshama. And they fixed the three different sins, different ways it's brought in different places, but the way it's brought, let's say in the Zohar or Mehemna, is that Avraham fixed up idolatry, and Yitzchak fixed up shfichus damim, murder, himself be killed on the altar for Hashem, saying Hashem, and then Yaakov fixed up illicit relations because he married the two sisters, and everyone else that would have been terrible. It was great. The point is that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov each fixed up the mission of Adam Rishon. That's what they did. Now, when they do that, remember, they're not doing that just as individuals. They're doing it as the forerunner of the Jewish people, because we are them. Okay? We are them. The child exists in the mind of the parent. And therefore, we all exist back in Adam's consciousness, back in his soul, and in Avram, and in Yitzchak, and in Yaakov. We all exist there. If someone converted, that's what they graft back on the tree and back to Avraham. So what they're doing, they're planting in our DNA. They're not just fixing up the past, they're fixing up the future. They're doing both. They're going back to the root of who they are and fixing that in Adam, and then they're fixing it in terms of the children in the future. That's what they're doing, because they're setting it into the DNA. Although it's a process, then it's a process that a person has to go and slowly, develop that, where you have the forefathers and the foremothers, they are the individuals, and then we come at all the particulars, all the what's called the sparks of the souls, and that we fix that gets fixed up in the general, or the specific details, and in the global sense of a nation. But the root is already being dealt with. So what happened was that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, when they completed their mission, they got a taste of the world to come. Abraham did it, Yitzhak did it, and Yaakov did it. And now when Yaakov did it, he wanted to sit b'shalva. He says, okay, I did it. I got everything, I did it. And he was right, except for one component. One I want to explain. We talked a lot in the past 2 weeks about Yosef and Yehuda. The two different kings. Yacov has 12 tribes, and he has the two kings from him of his children. But remember, they're all included back in the root. That's the way it works. Yehuda, in a certain sense, has a certain type of kingship, and so does Yosef. In a certain sense, Yosef is the one who has to do it. He's called tzaddik. Everything is right. Yehuda, in a certain place, has the quality of how Hashem directs him, where Hashem's going to put him. He's got to say it's all Hashem. That's why Yehuda's name is all the name of Hashem. Yud and the Hey, the Vav and the Hey, and he only has the letter Dalid. He's poor. I'm just a conduit completely. Yaakov does both things. He is the tzaddik. He does everything he has to do. But there's another aspect that happens once he finishes his mission. There's a greater plan Hashem wants to fix up. And Yaakov now has to actually live in a life of difficulty and suffering, and it's concealed from him. Why? Because there's a certain place he has to accept. There's a grand plan Hashem has for him that he doesn't know why. And this is so painful, because it's like the Maharal says, one of the reasons we can't know when the exile is over is because that's part of the exile. The part of the suffering, if you're getting out of jail in 5 years, getting out of jail in 5 years, but you don't know it's going to happen. But when it happened eventually, but when you don't know, so that's more difficult. So the concealment is part of that whole accepting. Yaakov does not know. God's left him. He doesn't know if he's. I can't even say it, but it seems like from his perspective, he doesn't know. He doesn't think he's a success. He thinks he failed. And what the ramifications of that are, they are. So he now goes through 22 years of difficulty and suffering. And that was part of Hashem's plan. Now, what was the plan? Which way? So there's two ways, going forward and going backwards. Going forward, Rav Cohen says that he was taking on all of the difficulties for his children, the future generations, and putting it into their DNA. By him having this place in his life where he thinks he's cut off, and he's still doing his mitzvahs, he's still doing the best he can, he's still trusting in Hashem, even though he thinks he's gone, thinks he messed up. That gave his children the power to be able to handle that challenge in the future when you don't see what we're doing. But he took it on for us. He did it because we are him. He put it into the DNA. Now, there's something even deeper. You go back in time, you see that Yaakov's difficult years, all this work, happened for 130 years. The last 17 years, which is the gematria of Tov, of good, was his taste of the world to come. But the 130 is a number that comes up in various situations, has a lot of deep Kabbalistic meanings. I want to say some couple points here. The 130 years, why 130 years? And he says when he meets Paro, he says, "Oh, my days are small and bad." 130 years were considered had an aspect of this suffering. Why? What happened for 130 years? If you go back to Adam Arishon, we said that Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov fixed up the sin of Adam Arishon, both in the cardinal sins of murder, illicit relations, and idolatry. They fixed that up. But there's something else that happened to Adam. After the sin, and he brought the world down to a lower level, he separated from Chava. He was not, the world had got mixed in with good and bad, and he was doing tshuva. 130 years, going to the mikvah, he was doing all these things, trying to purify himself for the sin of what had happened. So there was a point for this long period of time where Chava and Adam had separated. That means that the completion of the male-female was not coming to be. And whatever would come out of a man by accident would come out, and it didn't make its mark, reach its mark to create progeny. That is called 130 years of negativity coming out into the world by accident. It wasn't intended. Adam was trying to fix up everything and did wrong, but he separated from Chava because there was too much negativity. It could not bring out in that relationship, but it caused these negative things to be forces to be created. The Gemara talks about for 130 years. Those things that were created were not intentional acts of evil, or even in the sin in that sense of intentional. They were things that happened because there are problems in the world, and he has to deal with them and get through them. And there's a plan. Hashem is going to bring it through. The 130 years of Yaakov having to also suffer, besides all the good things he did, was fixing up that 130 years of Adam Arishon, of all the negative things that were created unintentionally. But the world was what it was. And by Yaakov taking and accepting the 130 years of this loss and suffering that and but not just like, okay, I'm sorry. He was suffering it, and what he was doing was understanding in some place, this is the will of Hashem. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why, but there's a problem, and he's somehow the vehicle to do it. He's the vehicle to do it for Adam Arishon, back for his 130 years, and he's the vehicle also for the children later on that will also go through challenges that are part of the grand plan, and they don't know why, but they have the power to withhold it now because Yaakov did it. That was 130 years, and it comes up again when they came to Egypt. The first 130 years is the problem. After that, Moshe's born. Moshe's born after the 130 years in Egypt. That's when he's born. That's when it says that the world could come to a completion. That was what happened with Yaakov Avinu. And let's go back in the pasuk a little bit. That's why it says Vayechi Yacov. Vayechi, he lived. That was now he had done his mission. His mission was, even though it was finished before, that was from his work aspect. But the challenges and the suffering and the difficulties he had to still take on for the past and for the future and accept them and say, this is part of Hashem's plan. I don't know how, why and how, but that's what it is. And he took it and he did it. That was only finished now, and that's why now he gets Vayechi. Now, that's also why it says, I asked earlier, why did it say Vayechi Yaakov? Why didn't it say if he got life now, why didn't it say his higher name of Yisrael? And Sadak says because like this, because he was also taking it for the future generations. The life that Yaakov was culminating now was also because he knew there's going to be these generations that are going to go through challenges, and literally you have to think about it to relate to it like us in a certain way. I mean, there's I got to say it exactly, but Sefer says that even though the neshamas today are smaller, but in some sense, since every year they're being fixed up through all the aspects of what's happening. There's a certain aspect where a certain aspect is greater. We're called midgets on the shoulder of giants. So what happened was that when Yacov was taking this on, this life, he was infusing into the aspect of Yacov, even to the lower neshamas. And that's specifically why it had to be in the land of Egypt. Because in that darkness was the place where there was going to be the separation between the pulling out of the good, the place where sometimes, if it's like it says that the Torah really flourished in Bavel, in exile. And it says that Ezra came and established the Torah in Israel, and Hill came from Bavel and established it. There was a certain place when sometimes when a person is in the challenges, in the darkness, that's when he could work things through. People don't go and start growing when things are just good. They grow when they have that challenge. So the last 17 years of goodness is Yaakov's experience in Egypt because he finished his 130 years. But it's in Egypt because it's also now turning Yaakov into a nation of 600,000 people who are going to be able to get the Torah, and their refinement has to come through the challenge of Egypt. And that's why it's the name Yaakov, because it's also for the lower souls that have to be refined. Okay, that is a lot of stuff. I want to just tie together the last piece of this. We asked early, we said, I don't understand. With when Yaakov was coming down to meet Yosef, and it says he was saying Krishma. Why did he say Krishma then? Why didn't he plan it and say it, before? Meet Yosef later. And this you have to understand, this is why I'm tying this to this concept in this class. To understand Yaakov's emotional feeling of losing Yosef is beyond what a person could imagine. As I said, it's the tremendous love for the child, but it's the love of his life. It's Rachel, his zivug. It's Yosef, his continuity. It's being cut off from his wife, his extension of himself, and himself. Because he thinks he's gone, he thinks he's lost, he didn't make his purpose in life. And that's being cut off from Hashem. That's why he has the divine expression left him. And everything makes no sense. His world has fallen apart, literally. That's what Yaakov is. His world's fallen apart. I mean, it's incredible that the prophet Yaakov doesn't have prophecy. Why not? Because he is in pain. And the great prophet can't get out of it. Why? Because Hashem closed it off for him. Hashem sealed his eyes. Hashem wanted him to experience, as we said, this state. Now, what happens is that when he sees Yosef, this is not just a hug of a father who lost his son and the tremendous joy they would have to see his son still alive. This is the hug that is Yaakov finding his son, finding himself, finding his purpose, finding his source. And therefore, there is no better place to say Shema. This is the time of Shema. I mean, I guess it was the physical time of Shema also, but it means this is the time of Shema when a person realizes Shema Yisrael, Hashem K'Hashem Hashem Echad. One, Hashem has one plan, and sometimes you don't know what's going on, and it's hard, and you're trying and you try, and then you don't know what's flying, and it's just falling apart. But there's a plan. And there's Echad. Echad, the sage, is one. It says Echad is also referring to Hashem, so referring to Yaakov himself. Yaakov is the Aleph, he's the one. Het is 8. He had 8 children from the Gevirot, from the main mothers, from Rivka, from Rachel and Leah. And then he had Dalet, which is 4. He had the 4 sons from the Bnei Shvachos, from Bilhah and Zilpah. So Echad is Gematria 13 is 1 with the 12 children. We said many times, is 1 expanding into 12. And that's really the oneness. And Yaakov realizes that's him. He's got to pull it all together. He's got to be the culmination of bringing oneness and God into the world. And he thinks he blew it. And then he sees Yosef. And he realizes that all of the suffering, all of the problems, all the things, all made sense. And that's the time to say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's the time to say it. That's the time to say the love of his son is so great, and love of his son is a expression of his love, his source. Right? There's a reason why we feel these waves. Hashem gives us the love to a child. We can understand the love to our source, right? Love to a brother. Hashem gives us all these emotions to understand these relationships, to understand the ultimate connection, the ultimate connection to Hashem, to our source. And therefore, there is no greater time to take the joy of seeing Yosef and sublimate it into the experience of the love of everything back to the source, back to Hashem, and his whole life now makes sense. And that's the Shema. So he says he gets it. And that's why it says that when he lived in Mitzrayim, the 17 years, it wasn't just he lived those years, it also shone a light on all the previous years to put it all together, and that was a taste in the world to come. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it says Hashem gave the three Avos taste of the world to come. We have it on Shabbos a little bit, but a lot of times we're doing things and we're trying, and it's not going, and we're frustrated, and we don't know what the plan is. You got to take this lesson because Yacov put it into our DNA. And therefore, even if you can't make sense of it, even if you don't know how, that's one of the reasons this parsha is called the Setuma. It's closed. There's always breaks in the parsha. Why are there breaks in the parsha? Because when Hashem told to Moshe, he gave him breaks to think about it. So Tzadok says this is closed off. There's no break. There's no time to think about it because it doesn't make sense. Yaakov's completion is going to be in Egypt, and these things are not things that people can grasp. Yaakov at that moment grasped. He saw it, but we don't see in our lives how the grand thing all makes sense. How does the grand plan make all sense? No one see it. But one day we will. One day we will. And Yaakov put that into our DNA. So we have to remember the two processes. The one process is the effort. Make the effort. Do what we have to do, realize that that's what we're put in the world to do. But, the famous expression, rhymes in Yiddish, doesn't rhyme in English, but God plans and Hashem laughs. It rhymes in Yiddish, doesn't rhyme in English. But the idea is that you don't get reward. I say that's not the expression. That's not the expression. But the point is that it's not a question of what you end up doing. It's what you succeed at. It's what you do. Because I'm trying. The fact that Hashem has a plan, he's taking care of his plan. Don't worry. And therefore, if you take out $100 to give someone charity and the wind comes and blows it away, you get the reward as if you did it because you intended to do it. Maybe Hashem didn't want the guy to get it because he's going to go, I don't know, buy drugs or whatever it is. So he's got a plan. So it's not always what you're succeeding at the end. It's that I know that I have to make that effort. And when it doesn't go the way I want it, I have to have the understanding and the confidence that Hashem will bring it to its grand plan, to its fruition that's been put into our DNA. We can do it. And when we believe that, we could take things with a whole different perspective and feel very positive and relaxed and good and make our efforts and hope and pray and be sure that it'll get to where it has to go. All the best.